This presentation will explore one of Wicklow County Archives' more unusual collections, John Tate's Charity. This collection was donated to the County Archives in 2012 with thanks to the charity's trustees. This project is funded by the Heritage Council and a descriptive catalogue of the collection and exhibition will launch shortly. Founded in 1787, John Tate's Charity has provided support to the residents of Rathdrum Parish and the wider area for over 200 years. The charity's papers have provided the basis for an exhibition and this digital presentation which tells the story of the charity's activities within the historical context. Here we have a partial family tree for the Tate family. James Tate inherited land from his family and lived at Fannanerin near Glenmalure. He added to the family's landholdings in 1767 by taking leases on almost 2,000 acres of properties in Coolballintaggart, Ballycurramore, Ballygobbin and Ballytague. The owner, John Hayes, a landowner himself with 4,500 acres at Hayesville, later to be known as Avondale, lent James the £350 to acquire the leases. In 1774, James would buy out the lease and fully acquire the land for £1,200, again using a loan from John Hayes. James Tate became a church warden at Rathdrum Parish Church as well as a parish councillor between 1758 and 1772. In 1778, he was appointed a member and a plotter of the Wicklow Grand Jury, collecting tithes in the barony of Ballinacor. John Tate inherited his father's landholdings and in June 1771 he took a lease on 200 acres in Ballard from Daniel Lawrence, who was a local landowner in 1825 and also a tithes commissioner for Rathdrum Parish. He would later lease John 895 acres at Cullentraw. Following John's death, this land would form the basis of the charity. John continued to consolidate and expand his landholdings, largely with loans from John Hayes, who was the landowner in many cases, by acquiring more leases and buying out others to acquire full title. John was proving very successful in building up his landholdings and was a well-respected member of the local landed community who supported his rising status. However, he died unmarried at the age of 33. He had 2 children out of marriage and, despite the norms of the time, managed in his will to ensure that they would be looked after in the event of his death. John Tate bequeathed his interest in the leased property of 895 acres at Cullentraw to form the basis of the charity. The purpose of the charity was to help fund benevolent deeds within the confines of Rathdrum Parish. In his will, Tate specified the type of philanthropic endeavours he had in mind. The best use of his resources would involve patronising industry, i.e. hard work, among the poor inhabitants, by lending out small sums of money not exceeding £5 to any person interest-free. Donations rather than loans should only be distributed in exceptional circumstances, like in the cases of sickness or some unforeseen misfortune or sudden emergency happening to any of the poor of the said parish, or when dealing with aged or infirm people, or when there is a family of 5 children and upwards whose parents or themselves are unable by their labour to provide a sufficient support. Beneficiaries must be resident in Rathdrum Parish for at least 3 years. The charity would not discriminate based on religion. The charity would provide interest-free loans of up to £5 repayable over 12 months and only in cases of extreme hardship would donations to the poor of the parish be made. The will clearly laid out rules for qualifying as a trustee and their reporting requirements. It also made provision for the trustees to change the rules for the management of the charity and to make decisions as to how they should invest any surplus funds for the benefit of the charity. The first trustees were Samuel Hayes, Avondale Estate, the Reverend Richard Strong, Rathdrum Parish, Abraham Critchley, husband of Anne Tate, Thomas King of Kingstown Estate, who was a friend and business associate of John Tate, as was Daniel Lawrence, a landowner in the area. And here we have a plaque commemorating John Tate's bequest, which hangs in St. Saviour's Church in Rathdrum, and also the original deed related to the bequest. Tate's charity began its work in the early 1790s. Rathdrum Parish had a population of around 2,688 in the 1830s, of whom 1,500 lived in the town. Rathdrum acted as a principal centre for the area due to its location in the middle of the county and the roads connecting it to the east coast. It is likely that the population was similar in the late 1780s-1790s. The high percentage of town dwellers was unusual in the county, due in some part to the small local industries. There was a thriving flannel weaving industry in the area around Rathdrum, made up of hand weavers and a large weaving mill, Allen's in Greenan, employing up to 300 people. In 1793, the Flannel Hall was built, paid for by Earl Fitzwilliam at a cost of £3,500. It served as the sales point for all flannel production in the area. Fitzwilliam received a toll of 2p per 120 yards sold and was earning an average of £300 per annum. The weaving mill in Greenan was burnt down during the 1798 rebellion. The industry would fail in the early 1820s as a result of the Act of Union, which removed any duties on imports from the UK. There was also a mining industry both in Avoca and nearby Glendalough, and Comerford's flour mill in the town itself. Rathdrum Parish had, in Irish terms, been relatively prosperous, but a large proportion of the population lived at subsistence level. The loss of the weaving industry had a significant impact on the local economy and employment. The end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 also resulted in a collapse of agricultural prices. In the early 1820s, Ireland suffered a partial failure of the potato crop, increasing hardship for the local population. Social supports. In the 1790s and through to the mid-1800s, where there was little in the way of formal structures to provide medical and health care, schooling or support for the poor. Where these were available, they relied on charitable donations, in some cases with matched funding through the grand juries, who were the predecessors of the county councils. In terms of financial support, in order to qualify for financial support, a person must be resident in the parish for at least 3 years. The rules of the charity stated that support was to be provided through interest-free loans of up to £5. The minute books from 1800 to 1840 contain hundreds of names of those in the parish that would have received money from the charity, detailing the amount and the reason for the loan or donation. In the 1860s, the number of donations still exceeded the number of loans, as you can see here on this table. At the time of John Tate's death in 1787, there was no doctor in Rathdrum Parish. Dispensary doctors were first established by legislation in 1805 under an Act of Parliament, by which they were defined as an institution where medicine and advice are given gratis to the poor. In 1810, the charity provided the sum of £50 a year to provide and keep open a dispensary in the parish. It is probable that the grand jury provided a matching sum per annum. This scene above here shows a doctor in an actual dispensary. However, in most cases, the services were provided through home visits. And in terms of education, there was no school in Rathdrum in the early 1800s. On the 12th of March 1812, the charity instructed William Parnell Hayes to source the best and cheapest mode to establish schools in different towns of the parish for the education of the poor. A salary for a teacher for a Protestant Sunday school was also granted. In 1827, a school for 160 pupils of both sexes had been established in Rathdrum. 80 pupils were educated free of charge. The teacher's salary was paid by Erasmus Smith Charity. A small school was also established in the Flannel Hall, supported by Earl Fitzwilliam. The first real government policy to address poverty in Ireland was the Poor Law, which was enacted in 1838. Its functions were broadly similar to those in England. The operating cost for each Poor Law union was to be provided through a Poor Law rate. Support was to be provided through a network of 130 workhouses. The Rathdrum Union was established in 1839 and a Board of Guardians appointed. Their duty was to care for those who were unable to provide for themselves. In reality, the workhouse provided food and shelter for the destitute. This did not extend to the provision of medical care. It did not provide for any support or relief outside of the workhouse until 1847. And you can find records of the Rathdrum and Shillelagh workhouses and the minute books of the Rathdrum Board of Guardians in our digitised collections on wicklow.ie. Rathdrum Workhouse was to meet the needs of a large territory covering a population of 51,000 in the electoral areas of Newcastle, Killisky, Arklow, Kilbride, Castle McAdam, Dunganstown, Wicklow, Rathdrum, Glendalough, Roundwood, Glenealy and Aughrim. The inaugural meeting of the Rathdrum Workhouse Board of Guardians took place in the Flannel Hall on the 5th of November 1839. The workhouse, with a capacity of 600, was completed in 1842. Land for the workhouse was leased from Earl Fitzwilliam, and workhouse employees included a medical officer, a schoolmaster and a schoolmistress. A separate fever hospital would be set up in the new brewery leased from the Ellis family. Regrettably, there are no minute books for the charity's activities from 1840 to 1867. However, it is interesting that many of its trustees also served on the Board of Guardians of the Rathdrum Union. It is thought, although undocumented, that the charity suspended its activities during the famine period and assigned its funds to the parish. Tate's Clothing Club started in 1877 and ran until 1979. In effect, it was like a savings club. The big difference was that the charity would match the funds saved, provided the subscriber saved consistently over the year. So, if someone saved £5, they would get clothing worth £10. They could also nominate the local draper where they would like the funds to be available. In 1884, there were 165 subscribers, 130 in 1915, 42 in 1923, and at the end of the fund in 1979, 20 people were subscribers. So what did people save for? In 1880, subscribers were buying boots and clothing fabrics, calico and flannel, for making their families' clothing. By 1935, it was boots, shoes, hose and ready-made clothes, shirts and coats. The savings were collected at Tate Charities office in Rathdrum, and in 1900 there was also a savings point in Aughrim. And here we see receipts for some of the local businesses in Rathdrum at that time, and also extracts from the charity's ledgers. So how did the charity's work change coming into the 20th century? Well, poverty in Ireland remained high in the early years of the century. The charity continued to provide interest-free loans and donations to the poor, as the minutes up to 1909 show. Unfortunately, there are no minute books after 1909. In 1906, the charity paid for a Miss Smith to act as a midwife in the parish, and the clothing club continued until 1979, although the number of subscribers had fallen to 20. As the needs of the community changed, the charity changed the focus of its support. It set up a student college loan scheme to provide interest-free loans to those who couldn't afford to meet the fees. There is also a record in 1978 where the County Wicklow Association for the Handicapped, the Rathdrum branch, records a donation of £1,000 from the charity to the school. And here we have some of the charity's trustees. We see Samuel Hayes. He was born in 1743 and he was a barrister and an MP in the Irish Parliament from 1783 to 1790. He was also involved with the Irish Volunteers. Hayes inherited Hayesville and he renamed it Avondale. He was appointed Sheriff of Wicklow in 1773. He was a talented amateur architect who helped design and build Avondale House and worked with Earl Fitzwilliam on the design of the Flannel Hall. In 1792, the Dublin Society appointed him to a committee to select a suitable site for a botanic garden. In 1794, Hayes wrote the first book on trees in Ireland, a practical treatise on planting and the management of woods and coppices. He was one of the first trustees of John Tate's charity. Reverend Robert Strong, he was the rector of Rathdrum Parish and a founding trustee of the charity, along with Samuel Hayes, Thomas Acton and Thomas King. Samuel Hayes, Thomas Acton and Thomas King were also commissioners overseeing building works done for the Reverend Richard Strong at the Glebe House at Rathdrum in 1793. This illustrates the close ties between the trustees and indeed the close ties with the community and the parish. Abraham Critchley was born circa 1750. He was the husband of Anne Tate, who was John Tate's sister. The Critchleys were a well-established and wealthy family resident in Ballyboy townland and shareholders in the Glendalough mines. Abraham and his family repelled a rebel attack on their house at Ballyboy in March 1798. The properties of James and Abraham Critchley, respectively, were totally burned and destroyed by a large body of rebels under General Holt that July. Abraham and John Critchley claimed just over £4,000 compensation from the government for the loss of the house, furniture and cattle at Ballyboy, and received that amount. Critchley was treasurer to the grand jury and deputy lieutenant of the county. He was one of the first trustees of John Tate's charity. We also have William Parnell Hayes. He was born in 1777 and he inherited the Avondale estate in County Wicklow from his uncle Samuel Hayes. He changed his name to Parnell Hayes in memory of Samuel. He was Charles Stewart Parnell's grandfather. In his 1804 pamphlet, An Inquiry into the Causes of Popular Discontents in Ireland, by an Irish country gentleman, he attributed Irish unrest to the Elizabethan conquest and confiscation of land, the tithe question, and the sectarian structure of the state. He also comprehensively denounced the Act of Union and advocated for Catholic emancipation. In August 1817, Parnell Hayes was elected as MP for County Wicklow, retaining the seat in the general elections of 1818 and 1820, while also serving as Deputy Lieutenant for the county. In 1820 he published a letter on the potato diet of the Irish to the editor of the Quarterly Review, which expressed unease at the widespread reliance on a single food crop. He was a trustee of the John Tate charity in 1809. Thomas Acton of Kilmacurra estate. The estate was also known as West Aston when the eldest surviving son, Thomas, succeeded. In 1780 he married Miss Sidney Davis, daughter of Dublin barrister Joshua Davis. With some support from the Royal Dublin Society, Thomas and Sidney continued to develop the gardens at Kilmacurra, which would become one of the National Botanic Gardens in 1996. And Thomas Acton himself was a trustee of the Tate charity in 1809. William Acton, also of Kilmacurra estate, was a Justice of the Peace for County Wicklow and High Sheriff of the county in 1820. He served as Lieutenant Colonel of the Wicklow Militia and as MP for County Wicklow from 1841 to 48. He was known as a benevolent landlord and he organised several famine projects on the estate to stave off starvation, not only for local people but also for labourers from County Mayo. He was a trustee of the Tate charity in 1836. The Irish nationalist politician Charles Stewart Parnell was born at Avondale House in 1846. He was the grandson of William Parnell Hayes. Part of his earliest education was provided by Reverend Wyndham Guinness, rector of Rathdrum Parish and also a trustee of the Tate charity. Parnell was an Irish nationalist politician who served as a Member of Parliament from 1875 to 1891. He was leader of the Home Rule League from 1880 to 1882 and then of the Irish Parliamentary Party from 1882 to 1891. And he held the balance of power in the House of Commons during the Home Rule debates 1885 to 86. Parnell was a trustee of the charity in 1867 and he was also the charity's chairman from 1869 to 1878. James Comerford, owner of Comerford Mills in Rathdrum, who also lived at Ardavon House in Rathdrum, was a trustee of the Tate charity from 1867 to 1906, and Reverend William Guinness, who was born in 1795 and died in 1864. He was the rector of Rathdrum Parish, and he was also the son of the famous Arthur H. Guinness, the brewer. He was a trustee of the Tate charity in 1836. While this collection is hugely important to the local history of County Wicklow, it is also of national historical significance as a fine example of the philanthropic activities of the landed gentry in Ireland in the 18th and 19th centuries. This class are well represented in local authority archive collections, both in private collections and records of former local authorities, namely the Boards of Guardians and the Grand Juries. However, the records of John Tate's charity also offer an insight into the lives and needs of the poor in Wicklow and the work of those running the charity. The charity is still active today. Finally, I would like to express our gratitude to the trustees of the charity, and particularly Michael Ryan, and I would also like to thank the Heritage Council for their support of this project. Thank you for your attention, and our contact details are here. Thank you.